Clara Whitmore had not spoken to her father in 42 days, not because she hated him, because every time she tried, someone wrote it down wrong. If she cried, the therapist called it fear. If she asked for her father, Aunt Celeste called it confusion. If she said she wanted to go home, the lawyer asked which home, and the judge looked at reports instead of her face. So Clara stopped using sentences adults could twist. She used flowers. Before the accident, her mother taught her a rule. If something is wrong, she said, folding one paper petal backward, turn one part the other way. People who love you will look twice. But nobody looked twice. Not the therapist, not the lawyer, not even Dad. Aunt Celeste made sure of that, sitting close in every meeting, one hand on Clara's shoulder, the other near a folder marked custody and trust review. Then, on the morning the court would decide whether Clara could live with her father again, a poor boy outside lifted a paper flower. One petal was folded the wrong way. Clara saw it through the glass doors. Her heart kicked hard. The boy was selling flowers for rent money, jacket wet, fingers stained with cheap ink. Then a custody paper slipped from Mr. Price's folder. The boy picked it up, meant to return it, then stopped. That signature is upside down, he said. Mr. Price smiled thinly. It's a photocopy. Distortion happens. But Clara had seen that backward curve before, on a paper flower card her mother once held against the kitchen window. Aunt Celeste's hand closed around Clara's wrist, too tight. Clara looked at her father and whispered, "Dad, please look twice." Daniel Whitmore heard his daughter's whisper as if it had crossed the room through water. "Dad, please look twice." For 42 days, every legal report had told him Clara was afraid of him. The therapist had described his visits as destabilizing. Celeste had called his phone calls emotionally unsafe. Roland Price had used phrases like parental volatility and trauma regression until Daniel's grief sounded like evidence. But Clara was looking straight at him now. The bailiff guided Mateo away from the clerk's desk. The boy did not fight. He pressed the paper flower against his chest as if it were the only thing in the room that belonged to him. "Your Honor," Price said, adjusting his glasses, "this is precisely the kind of disruption we warned about. Mr. Whitmore's public profile has attracted opportunistic interference." Daniel stood too quickly. His chair scraped the floor. "I've never seen that boy before." "And yet he appears during your custody review," Price replied, holding a prop that has clearly upset the child. Celeste bent toward Clara. "Sweetheart, you don't have to be scared." Clara's mouth closed. Daniel saw it then, the way his daughter's shoulders tightened before Celeste even touched her, the way her eyes went flat when the therapist leaned forward with a pen ready. For months, he had mistaken silence for damage. Now he wondered who had taught her to survive by giving adults nothing they could use. The judge removed his glasses. "We will take a 15-minute recess. The minor child will remain with Miss Whitmore and the court-appointed therapist. Mr. Price, secure your documents. Mr. Whitmore, control yourself. Control yourself." Daniel had heard that phrase from board members, grief counselors, hospital administrators, reporters outside Evelyn's funeral. He had built Whitmore Learning from a rented office and 2 broken laptops, but in this room, his money could not buy him the right to ask his own daughter why her wrist was red where Celeste had held it. He looked at Clara again. She lowered her eyes. The recess broke open around him. Lawyers gathered folders. The therapist murmured into Clara's ear. Celeste kept one hand on the back of Clara's chair, her diamond bracelet catching the light each time Clara shifted. Daniel turned toward the doors. In the hallway, 2 guards stood near Mateo. The boy was soaked through, his sneakers leaving dull half-moons on the polished floor. A plastic mint box peeked from inside his jacket. Coins rattled when he moved. Daniel reached for his wallet. Mateo saw the motion and stepped back. "I didn't do it for money," the boy said. Daniel stopped. It shamed him, how quickly his hand had gone there. Money had been his first language for emergencies. Pay the best doctor, hire the best lawyer, replace the broken thing before anyone saw how badly it had cracked. But this child looked at money like it was another accusation. "What's your name?" Daniel asked. "Mateo." "Mateo what?" The boy's jaw tightened. "Mateo Alvarez. And I wasn't stealing that paper. It fell. I know." "No, you don't." Mateo's fingers closed around the flower. "People like you always know after someone else gets dragged away." One guard gave him a warning look. Daniel kept his voice low. "Tell me what you saw." Mateo glanced toward the courtroom doors. Through the narrow window, Clara sat between Celeste and the therapist, small enough to disappear between two adults who knew exactly where to place themselves. The signature leaned wrong, Matteo said. Like when a scan gets flipped, the pressure marks don't match the printed side. Price came out before Daniel could ask more. Mr. Whitmore, he said, any further contact with this minor will be interpreted as witness coaching. He's not a witness. Then stop treating him as one. Price turned to Matteo with a polite smile that made the boy shrink without stepping back. Young man, courthouse solicitation is not permitted beyond the exterior steps. You should go home before someone decides to file a report. Daniel heard the trap. If he defended Matteo too loudly, Price would turn it into proof. If he ignored him, the boy would vanish with the first true thing Daniel had heard all morning. A clerk called them back. Daniel returned to his table with nothing in his hands and too much in his chest. The judge resumed. Price requested that the interruption be noted as external agitation. Celeste asked for Clara to be excused. The therapist agreed that the child appeared overwhelmed. Clara rose. As she passed Daniel's table, she stumbled slightly. It was small. Too small for anyone else to care, but something pale slipped from her sleeve and landed beside Daniel's shoe. Celeste turned. Clara. Daniel bent before anyone could stop him. It was a paper flower, smaller than Matteo's, folded from the corner of a court memo. 4 petals neat, 1 petal turned backward. On the inside, in a child's careful pencil, Clara had written only 3 words, blue drawer stuck. Daniel found Matteo on the courthouse steps 10 minutes after the hearing paused for lunch. The rain had thinned to a grey mist. Reporters clustered near the entrance, waiting for a billionaire to give them a face they could sell. But Matteo stood beyond the columns where the cameras did not point. He was packing damp flowers into a shoebox with the quick, careful movements of someone used to leaving before he was ordered away. Daniel stopped several feet from him. Matteo noticed anyway. If you're going to give me money, the boy said, don't. Daniel slipped his hands into his coat pockets. I came to apologize. That made Matteo look up. Suspicion sat openly on his face, sharper than fear. For what? For reaching for my wallet before I reached for a question. Matteo did not forgive him. He only looked back down and pressed a bent green stem flat between 2 fingers. Daniel watched the small motion. Paper obeyed Matteo in a way people never seemed to. A crushed corner became a leaf. A torn strip became a stem. Something discarded became something another person might carry home. My daughter dropped a note, Daniel said. Matteo's fingers paused. What note? 3 words. Blue drawer stuck. The boy's expression changed, but not into understanding, into calculation. Daniel had seen that look across negotiation tables, only never on a child with rain in his hair. Is that supposed to mean something? I hoped you might know. I sell flowers. I don't solve rich people riddles. No, Daniel said. But you saw something a room full of adults missed. Matteo shut the shoebox. Adults miss things when missing them keeps their hands clean. The sentence landed harder than Daniel expected. He wanted to ask who had taught Matteo that, but the boy's chin lifted as if he would bite any pity that came close. Daniel looked toward the glass doors. Inside, Celeste was speaking with Price near the elevators. Clara stood between them, holding the therapist's hand. Not a child being comforted, a child being managed. I need to know why that signature looked wrong, Daniel said. Not for court, not yet. For myself. Matteo hesitated. Then he opened the shoebox again and pulled out a flower made from the back of a printed legal notice. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases against his knee. See this? He said, pointing to a line where the ink looked slightly raised. When paper comes from a real pen, the back feels different. Even if it's copied later, the first mark has a direction. But when a scan gets flipped, the loops lean like they're trying to walk backward. Daniel frowned. You learned that from folding flowers? From bad paper, Matteo shrugged. Law offices throw away drafts, copies, misprints, half pages. Sometimes the ink is still warm when I find it. If I use the wrong side, the flower looks dirty, so I notice. He said it plainly, without pride. That made Daniel believe him more. Where did Price's paper come from? The folder. I mean before that. Matteo glanced toward the row of office buildings across the street. Mr. Price's firm uses cream paper with a watermark. Thick, annoying to fold. But the page that fell today had a cheap copy shine, like it had been copied from something older. Daniel felt the first clean edge of anger slide through his grief. Can you show me? Matteo's eyes narrowed. No breaking into places. I wasn't asking you to. People with suits say that before they ask kids to do the part they don't want on camera. Daniel absorbed that because it was fair. Then we stay outside, he said. Public sidewalk, public bins. Nothing locked, nothing stolen. Mateo considered him for a long moment, then tucked the shoebox under one arm. Behind Price and Vale Family Council, the alley smelled of wet cardboard and coffee grounds. Mateo moved through it with the tense efficiency of a stray cat crossing traffic. He did not touch locked containers. He ignored black trash bags. He went only to a blue recycling cart beside the staff entrance, where loose paper had spilled under the lid. They toss non-client junk here, he said. Calendars, envelopes, wrong print jobs. If there's names, I don't use them for flowers. Daniel crouched beside him, feeling the absurdity of his expensive coat brushing alley water. 2 hours ago, his legal team had advised him to remain dignified. Now he was kneeling by a recycling cart with a child who trusted paper more than people. Mateo lifted a damp stack, checked the top sheets, then stopped at a narrow strip caught between two folders. It was only a torn margin. 3 words remained. Whitmore Custody Review. Below them, part of a date. Below that, the lower curve of a signature line. Daniel reached for it. Mateo pulled it back. Don't grab. If you smudge it, they'll say we made it. The boy laid it on a dry cardboard flap and used his sleeve to shield it from the mist. Daniel took a photo instead, then another from farther back, including the cart, the alley, the building number, the timestamp on his phone. Mateo watched. You've done this before? No, Daniel said. But I'm starting to understand that the truth needs witnesses before it needs speeches. For the first time, Mateo almost smiled. A call from Daniel's attorney cut through the moment. He listened, face tightening. The judge had allowed a supervised visit. 10 minutes. No discussion of the case. Celeste's therapist would remain in the room. Price objected to any mention of the boy, the flower, the signature, or the note. Daniel looked at Mateo. I have to go. I'm not coming inside. I'm not asking you to. But as Daniel turned, Mateo spoke. If she says weird things, don't correct her. Adults always correct kids when they don't understand. Just remember it. Daniel nodded once. The visit took place in a small conference room with frosted windows and a box of tissues placed too neatly at the center of the table. Clara sat opposite him. The therapist sat to her right with a notebook open. Celeste waited by the door, smiling as if she had invented patience. Daniel wanted to ask about the drawer, the flower, Evelyn, the red mark on Clara's wrist. He asked none of it. Instead, he said, I'm glad I get to see you. Clara looked at the tissue box. I'm supposed to say I'm glad too, she whispered. The therapist's pen moved. Daniel forced himself not to react. You can say what's true. Celeste's smile thinned. Daniel, let's keep this supportive. Clara's fingers crept toward the tissue box. She lifted one tissue, folded it in half, then again. Not a flower. Not fully, just the beginning of one. The therapist leaned forward. Clara, are you feeling anxious? Clara looked at Daniel, then at the folded tissue. Mom said wrong petals mean listen, she said. Celeste crossed the room too quickly. Sweetheart, we talked about confusing memories, but Daniel did not correct Clara. He remembered. Clara pressed the folded tissue flat. On the white surface, almost too faint to see, she had drawn a tiny rectangle with a blue pencil. A drawer. Beside it, one word, Evain. By 3 o'clock, Daniel understood the first rule of family court. Truth did not matter until it arrived in the correct format. A child's whisper was concern. A folded tissue was anxiety. A pencil mark was regression. A father asking the wrong question became pressure. A lawyer saying the same thing in a calm voice became procedure. Maren Cole, the emergency custody attorney Daniel hired during the lunch recess, said it plainly in the courthouse conference room. You cannot walk back in there and tell the judge your daughter is sending coded messages. Daniel paced beside the window. That's exactly what she's doing. And if you say it that way, Price will bury you before dinner. Maren opened a yellow legal pad. She was in her 50s, with silver hair pinned at the nape of her neck and the exhausted patience of someone who had watched good parents destroy themselves by sounding desperate. We need records, patterns, prior examples. Something that shows Clara used this language before today. Daniel stopped pacing. Prior examples. He thought of Evelyn on rainy afternoons, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor with Clara, turning construction paper into little gardens. He had passed them 100 times with a laptop under one arm, smiling without stopping. There had always been another call, another investor, another product launch that would only take a minute. He could remember the colors, but not the rules. That was the first thing shame did. It made memory feel like a room he had owned but never entered. Therapy drawings, he said. Maren looked up. Celeste has been submitting them as evidence. Clara's drawings. The therapist said they prove she feels unsafe with me. Do you have copies? Only what price attached to filings. Then we start there. Daniel's legal team had sent him thousands of pages over the past 6 weeks. He had skimmed summaries and trusted highlighted notes because every full report felt like reading a stranger's description of his child. Now, in the courthouse business center, he opened the case folder himself. The first drawing was labeled Session 4, Family Structure. A house, 3 figures, a cloud over the tallest one, which the therapist had interpreted as paternal emotional instability. Daniel saw the figure and swallowed hard. It was him, probably. The shoulders were too large. The mouth was a flat line. Then Maren tapped the lower corner. What's that? Near the edge of the page, below a tree, Clara had drawn a flower. 5 petals, 1 shaded blue. Daniel clicked to the next file. Session 5, Safety Mapping. A table, 2 chairs, a woman with yellow hair beside a smaller figure. The therapist's note read, Child places aunt closer than father. Indicates preference for maternal substitute. In the margin, half hidden under the scan shadow, was another flower. Again, 1 petal blue. Daniel opened the 3rd file too quickly. Session 6, Memory Processing. This time, Clara had drawn a garden with no people in it. The therapist called it avoidance. In the corner, 3 flowers stood in a row. Each had 1 petal turned a different direction. Maren leaned closer to the screen. She repeated it. Daniel's throat tightened. She kept telling them, no, Maren said carefully. She kept leaving a mark. That's different, legally, better. He looked at her. If we argue that adults failed to interpret her correctly, we need to show her mark was consistent before the hearing. A pattern is harder to dismiss than a moment. Daniel printed every page. He marked the dates. He did not let his assistant do it. He wrote the session numbers by hand because he needed to feel the timeline forming under his own fingers. Then he saw the phrase. It appeared in a therapist's typed note attached to Session 7. Child repeated phrase, blue drawer doesn't open anymore, when asked about maternal memories. When prompted to elaborate, child became guarded and requested aunt. Possible symbolic resistance to grief processing. Daniel read it twice. Maren did not interrupt. Blue drawer doesn't open anymore. What was Evelyn's blue drawer? Maren asked. Daniel hated that he did not know immediately. He called the house. The Whitmore residence had become too quiet since Evelyn died. Staff moved softly. Doors shut gently. Everyone treated him like a man who might break if a cup landed too hard in a sink. Mrs. Harlow, the house manager, answered on the 2nd ring. Mr. Whitmore? Evelyn had a blue drawer. Do you know what that means? A long pause followed. Not confusion. Worry. Sir, do you mean the blue cabinet in her workroom? Daniel closed his eyes. Workroom, not office. Evelyn had insisted on the difference. Offices were where people performed competence. Workrooms were where ideas were still allowed to be messy. What cabinet? The narrow one by the window. She kept drafts there. Letters too, I think. After the funeral, Miss Celeste asked that the room be kept closed. She said Clara was becoming distressed by it. Daniel gripped the phone. Did anyone move the cabinet? I'm not sure. Mr. Price's assistant came twice for estate documents. Miss Celeste was with him. Maren began writing before Daniel even repeated it aloud. Lock the workroom, Daniel said. Do not let anyone in without my approval. Another pause. Sir, Mrs. Harlow said quietly, Miss Celeste still has a key. Daniel looked through the conference room glass toward the courthouse hallway. Across the corridor, Celeste was speaking with the therapist. Her posture was gentle, almost sorrowful. She touched the woman's arm once, as if consoling her for the burden of protecting a child. For the first time that day, Daniel did not want to storm over. He wanted to document. Change the interior lock, he told Mrs. Harlow. Record who does it. Take photos before and after. Send everything to Miss Cole. Maren gave a short approving nod. Progress should have felt like relief. Instead, it made Daniel more aware of how late he was. Clara had not waited for him to become a better father. She had built a trail small enough to hide inside the very evidence being used against her. The next hearing session began with Price requesting additional restrictions. He stood at the counsel table with a fresh motion already printed, clipped, and marked for the judge. Daniel noticed the paper. Cream stock, heavy, the kind Mateo hated folding. Your Honor, Price said. Today's events demonstrate that Mr. Whitmore is introducing destabilizing symbolic language into the child's environment through third parties. Marin rose. There is no evidence of that. There is a pattern, Price replied. Flowers, drawers, upside-down imagery. These are not the spontaneous statements of a protected child. They are an orchestrated attempt to contaminate her therapeutic process. Daniel felt the old impulse rise, anger first, words second. Marin's hand moved slightly, palm down. Wait. So he did. Celeste dabbed the corner of her eye with a tissue that came away dry. I only want Clara to feel safe enough to heal. The judge looked tired. Tired was dangerous. Tired people liked clean explanations. Price gave him one. He requested that Daniel's supervised visits be suspended pending review. He requested no gifts, drawings, folded objects, coded language, or discussion of Evelyn's personal effects. He requested that Clara's therapeutic materials remain under professional interpretation only. Professional interpretation. Daniel looked down at the printed drawings in Marin's folder. The flowers were there. The blue marks were there. The phrase was there. And for weeks, every adult in power had looked at the same pages and called them symptoms. The judge did not grant everything Price asked for. That would have been too obvious, too harsh. Instead, he ordered a temporary restriction. Daniel could continue supervised contact, but any mention of flowers, drawers, Evelyn's workroom, or the courthouse incident was prohibited until the next review. Price sat down with the faint satisfaction of a man who had turned a child's signal into contraband. As the session adjourned, Clara was brought past the tables again. Celeste guided her with one hand between her shoulder blades. Clara did not look at Daniel this time. She looked at Marin's folder, at the corner of the printed drawing sticking out, at the little flower with one blue petal. Then Clara moved her thumb against her own palm. Once, twice, like she was turning an invisible key. Marin Cole's first instruction was simple. No heroics. Daniel stood in the back corridor of the courthouse, while she slid a folder into her briefcase. I'm not planning any. That is exactly what people say before they do something stupid with righteous intentions. She snapped the clasp shut. Price will expect you to react like a grieving father. Angry, public, careless. We give him the opposite. The opposite meant paperwork. Marin filed a formal request for the full therapeutic record, the original custody petition, and access logs for every estate document submitted after Evelyn's death. She copied the court clerk, Price's office, and the guardian ad litem. She did everything cleanly enough that Price could not call it harassment. By 5 o'clock, his answer arrived. Denied pending relevance determination. Marin read the email twice. He's preserving control. Daniel's phone buzzed before he could answer. Mrs. Harlow had sent photos from Evelyn's workroom. The blue cabinet by the window, its paint chipped near the handle, its brass lock scratched bright around the keyhole. One message followed. Interior lock changed. Room secured. But the blue drawer itself will not open. Looks forced from the inside or jammed with something. Daniel stared at the screen. Forced from the inside. The phrase made no sense. Drawers did not defend themselves. People did. Marin glanced over. That's tomorrow. If you rush home now, Price will say you're disturbing potential evidence. We need a witness, photographs, and someone neutral present. Daniel hated the answer because it was right. Then Marin pointed at an invitation pinned to the courthouse bulletin board. A bar association reception was being held that evening in the atrium of Price's building. Legal aid donors, judges, firm partners, press. Public enough to enter with a name badge. Formal enough that Price would have to smile. We go, she said. We listen. We do not touch anything. Daniel found Matteo outside under the stone lion, tying the last of his unsold flowers with string. You people keep finding me, Matteo said. This time I'm asking before I move. Daniel showed him a photo of the blue cabinet. Have you seen this color on any paper, any folder, anything from Price's office? Matteo studied the image, then the scratched keyhole. That drawer didn't just stick. Daniel waited. When paper jams, edges bend one way. That wood is scratched both ways. Someone tried to open it, then tried to make it look locked. Marin's eyebrows rose slightly. Matteo looked embarrassed by his own certainty. My grandmother's dresser does that. Daniel told him about the reception. Matteo immediately shook his head. No, I'm not asking you to sneak in. Good. But if you wait outside, and if you see anything thrown out, Matteo laughed once, without humor. So I'm still the trash part. Daniel felt the shame of the question. "You're right," he said. "That was wrong." Mateo shoved the flowers into his shoebox. "Adults only hear kids when they need something small picked up from the floor." He walked away. At 7, Daniel entered the Price and Vale building beneath a chandelier shaped like falling glass. He wore the correct suit, the correct expression, and a visitor badge Marin had made him sign for at the front desk. Everything about the place was built to make wrongdoing feel impossible. Polished stone, soft music, framed awards for child advocacy. Roland Price greeted him near the elevators. "Mr. Whitmore," he said warmly enough for nearby donors to hear. "I'm glad you chose dialogue over escalation." Daniel accepted the handshake. "I'm learning the value of procedure. Then perhaps there's hope for tomorrow." Marin stepped in. "We're here for the reception, Roland. Nothing more." "Of course." Price's smile did not reach his eyes. "Enjoy the hors d'oeuvre." Daniel scanned the atrium. Celeste stood near a marble column speaking with a family court consultant. She wore navy now, softer than black, less bridal than cream, mourning adjacent. Respectable. When she saw Daniel, she lifted a hand in a small, sad greeting, as though he were the difficult relative everyone hoped would behave. He did not go to her. Instead, he followed Marin's lead through clusters of lawyers and donors, listening for fragments. Most meant nothing. Grant proposals, judicial retirements, a joke about billable hours. Then he saw Price touch Celeste lightly at the elbow and guide her toward a side corridor marked staff only. Marin caught Daniel's sleeve. "No, they're leaving. And you are staying in the public area." Daniel looked toward the corridor. A catering cart rolled past him. Behind it, wearing a borrowed black apron over his wet hoodie, was Mateo. Daniel's pulse kicked. Mateo did not look at him. The boy kept his head down and pushed the cart with 2 hands, following a server through the staff doors. Inside the service corridor, Mateo learned his mistake in less than 30 seconds. The hallway was not a back door to secrets. It was a narrow vein of locked offices, security cameras, and adults who belonged there. The server turned into a kitchen alcove. Mateo tried to keep walking with the cart, but a guard stepped into his path. "Deliveries stay in catering." Mateo pointed back. "They asked for extra napkins." "Who did?" He had no name ready. The guard's eyes dropped to his sneakers. Too worn for staff, too wet for the building. Mateo turned the cart around, cheeks hot, and nearly collided with a woman carrying a stack of file boxes. The top box tipped. He caught it before it fell. A cream sheet slid halfway out. "Whitmore, review copy." Then a door opened down the hall. Celeste's voice came first, low and tight. The child recognized it. Price answered more softly. "The child recognized a shape. That is all." She said, "Look twice." A pause. "The upside-down mark should have died in the scan," Price said. "It was never meant to survive a color copy." Mateo's fingers tightened around the file box. Celeste said, "And the drawer?" "Contained." "That is not an answer. It is the only answer you need in a hallway." Footsteps approached. Mateo shoved the loose cream page back into the box, just as the woman noticed his hands on it. "Excuse me," she said sharply. The guard turned. Mateo let go. "I was helping." The woman looked at his apron, then his face. "You're not catering." Price appeared at the end of the corridor with Celeste behind him. His expression changed by a fraction. For anyone else, it might have been surprise. On Price, it looked like an opportunity arriving on schedule. "Well," he said, "this is unfortunate." Daniel reached the staff doors, just as the guard brought Mateo into the atrium by the arm. "Let go of him," Daniel said. Every conversation nearby thinned into attention. Price followed at a measured pace. "Mr. Whitmore, I strongly advise you not to interfere. This minor was found in a restricted corridor handling confidential legal materials." "I caught a box," Mateo snapped. "It almost fell. A box containing privileged documents," Price said. Marin stepped between Daniel and the guard. "Was anything removed?" "That is what we'll determine," Price replied. "But the larger concern is obvious. A child already involved in today's disruption appears inside my firm after speaking privately with Mr. Whitmore." Daniel felt the trap close. Phones were rising. Celeste stood behind Price with one hand against her chest, her face arranged in quiet devastation. "This poor boy is being used," she said, "by adults who should know better." Mateo's eyes cut to Daniel. There it was, the accusation he had feared from the beginning, that helping Daniel meant becoming evidence against himself. Daniel wanted to say the hallway, the scan, the drawer. He wanted to repeat the words Price had spoken, but he had not heard them himself. Mateo had. If Daniel dragged those words into the room now, Price would make the boy a trespasser before he became a witness. So Daniel did the harder thing. He stepped back. "Marin," he said, keeping his voice even, "make sure Mateo has counsel before anyone questions him." Price's smile tightened. Mateo stared at Daniel as if he could not decide whether stepping back was betrayal or protection. Daniel met his eyes and gave the smallest shake of his head. Not now. For once, Mateo listened, but as the guard led him toward the security office, one damp paper flower slipped from his apron pocket and fell near Daniel's shoe. This one was made from cream paper. In the corner, almost hidden by a fold, were two printed words, color copy. The next morning began with a rule Daniel was learning to hate. Nothing was proof until someone with the right title said it was. Mateo had spent the night with a legal aid attorney Marin trusted, not in a cell, not in a holding room, and not alone with Price's security team. That was the only victory Daniel allowed himself to count. By 8, Marin had arranged a document examiner named Dr. Sylvia Nance to meet them in a small office 3 blocks from the courthouse. She did not gasp over signatures or promise to expose conspiracies. She wore a grey cardigan, carried a magnifying lamp in a padded case, and spoke with the careful boredom of a person who knew courts respected caution more than outrage. Daniel placed the photos on her desk, the custody page from the hearing, the torn margin from the recycling cart, the cream paper flower with the words color copy caught in the fold. Dr. Nance put on gloves. Mateo stood by the door, arms crossed. He had refused the chair. He had also refused breakfast until Marin slid a wrapped muffin toward him without looking at him, as if it were office clutter. Dr. Nance studied the images first, then the paper, then the fold marks. "What the boy noticed is plausible," she said. Daniel leaned forward. "Plausible? Useful word. Courts like it better than certain." She adjusted the lamp. "This signature appears reproduced from an image source, not executed directly on this page. See the broken edges in the downstroke? The ink density is too even. A live signature has pressure changes." Mateo muttered, "Loops walking backward." Dr. Nance glanced at him. Crude phrasing. Not wrong. Mateo looked away before pride could show. Daniel pointed to the lower curve. "Can you say it was forged?" "I can say it bears characteristics consistent with image transfer, possible inversion, and secondary reproduction. I cannot authenticate the source without the original document, scan metadata, or a known exemplar. So it isn't enough. It is enough to ask better questions." She removed her gloves. "It is not enough to win a custody fight by itself." Marin wrote that down exactly. Daniel hated how every answer came with a locked door attached. The second door was the notary log. Marin subpoenaed the public notary register through the clerk's office instead of asking Price. They waited in a records room that smelled of toner and old carpet, while a clerk named Anika rolled her chair between 2 monitors. Daniel recognized her from the hearing. She had been the only court employee who looked down when Mateo said the signature was upside down. "I can only provide public entries," Anika said. "No sealed filings, no privileged attachments." "Understood," Marin replied. Anika entered Evelyn Whitmore's name, then Daniel's, then Celeste's. Her face changed by a fraction. "There is an entry for a Whitmore estate authorization," she said. "Date filed March 18th, notarized March 17th. Daniel gripped the edge of the counter. "Evelyn died on March 16th. Marin's pen stopped moving. "Can you print the entry?" Anika clicked once. The printer did not start. "The index shows the entry," she said. "But the scanned page is skipped in the batch. It goes from page 42 to page 44. Could be scanning error?" Marin asked. "It could be." Anika did not sound convinced. "The physical log may still be in archives, but retrieval takes a request." "How long?" "Standard is 5 business days." 5 days. Clara could be moved, coached, isolated, folded smaller inside the language adults preferred. Marin touched Daniel's sleeve under the counter. A warning. Daniel swallowed the anger. "Please file the request." Anika lowered her voice. "There was a sealed envelope last month. Bluebird. I remember because the name was odd. It was logged for minor child review, then reassigned." Marin's expression sharpened. "Reassigned to whom?" "I can't say without authorization." Price's voice came from behind them. "Then I recommend you don't." He stood in the doorway with a paper cup of coffee, and no surprise in his face. Marin turned. "Roland, following us now? Protecting the integrity of a minor's sealed matter." He stepped inside, nodding politely to Anika. Mr. Whitmore is under temporary restrictions regarding symbolic prompts. It would be unfortunate if court staff became part of an improper influence campaign. Anika's face closed. Daniel watched it happen. One sentence, professionally delivered, and a possible witness became a locked drawer. Marin collected the printed index. "We'll submit the archive request." "Do that," Price said. "Procedure protects everyone." Daniel thought of Clara's red wrist and said nothing. That afternoon, they went to Evelyn's workroom with Marin, Mrs. Harlow, a locksmith, and a retired court officer Marin hired to witness the entry. Daniel wanted Matteo there. Marin refused. "Price already tried to turn him into your tool," she said. "Do not hand him the handle." So Matteo waited outside the estate gates with his grandmother in a borrowed sedan, pretending not to care. Evelyn's workroom had been closed for months, but it had not been still. Daniel felt it the moment Mrs. Harlow unlocked the door. Dust lay on the shelves in uneven layers. One chair had been moved recently. Its legs had left pale lines on the floor. A stack of children's books sat crooked beside the window. The blue cabinet stood beneath it, narrow and bright against the muted room. The locksmith photographed the lock before touching it. "Scratched both ways," he said. "Someone tried keys. More than one. Then something jammed from inside." "How does a drawer jam from inside?" Daniel asked. "Paper wedge. Broken object. Depends what was shoved there." He worked slowly. Each click seemed too loud. Daniel stood back, because Marin told him to. His whole body wanted to reach over the man's shoulder and force the drawer open. When the lock finally gave, the drawer moved less than an inch. The locksmith bent lower. "Something's blocking the rail." He used a thin tool and eased out a strip of torn paper, then another. Not files, not bank records, not the proof Daniel had imagined. Children's book paper. Half of an illustrated page. Marin put on gloves and lifted it onto a clean sheet. The picture showed part of a table, a blue window, and the bottom half of a paper flower. The top had been torn away. On the margin, in Evelyn's handwriting, was one unfinished line. "When the truth is turned," the rest was missing. Mrs. Harlow covered her mouth. Daniel did not speak. He stared at the torn edge as if the missing half might grow back if he punished himself hard enough. Marin leaned closer. This was used as a wedge, to keep the drawer from opening, or to keep something inside from sliding out. The locksmith removed the drawer fully. Behind it, pressed flat against the back panel, was a small blue pencil, broken near the tip. Clara's kind. The same pale blue from the tissue drawing. A text arrived from Marin's assistant. "Emergency motion filed by Price. Request to relocate minor child to therapeutic residential program, out of state pending stabilization review." Daniel read the message once, then again. Marin was already reaching for her phone. "He's moving faster." Daniel looked at the torn page, at the blue pencil, at the drawer that had held back more than paper. Every piece they found answered one question and created two more. The signature looked transferred, but from where? The notary date was impossible, but the page was missing. Evelyn had written a warning, but half of it was gone. And now Price was trying to move Clara somewhere Daniel could not watch the doors. Outside, through the workroom window, Matteo stood beside his grandmother's car, arms wrapped around himself in the cold. Daniel took a photo of the torn page, then stopped. "Wait," he said. Marin looked up. Daniel turned the page gently under the light. On the back, hidden where the wedge had folded, were 4 tiny blue indentations. Not words, marks. Pressed through from another sheet that had once been on top of it. 4 petals, one turned the wrong way. Clara had been in this drawer too. For 1 hour, Daniel believed the case had finally turned. Dr. Nance signed a preliminary declaration before noon. She did not call the custody signature forged. She did not accuse Roland Price of anything. Her language remained narrow, professional, and almost painfully restrained. Characteristics consistent with image transfer, possible inversion during reproduction. Further examination requires original file, source scan, and metadata. To Daniel, it looked like a locked door. To Marin, it was the first key. "This is enough to request a preservation order," she said, arranging the declaration beside photographs from Evelyn's workroom. "Not victory. Access. We ask the court to freeze all document movement, compel production of originals, and delay relocation." Daniel looked at the torn book page sealed in an evidence sleeve. When the truth is turned, the unfinished sentence felt less like a clue than an accusation. Evelyn and Clara had both tried to finish something, while Daniel arrived late with experts and stamped motions. Marin slid another page across the table. "The notary index gives us pressure. The workroom gives us relevance. Dr. Nance gives us reason to ask. And Clara? Marin's face softened by only a degree. Clara gives us urgency, but we still cannot make her carry the case. Daniel nodded. He had failed at that once already. Now he understood children should not have to be perfect witnesses to deserve protection. The emergency review was set for late afternoon. Price arrived with 3 binders. Celeste arrived with Clara. The girl wore a pale sweater and held nothing in her hands. No pencil, no folded tissue, no book. Her fingers kept searching for something that was not there. Daniel noticed. So did Price. Marin presented the declaration first. Zots, dots, so to be, so chiva. Her voice stayed even. She did not dramatize the signature. She did not mention conspiracies. She laid each piece down carefully. The document examiner, the impossible notary date, the missing log page, the workroom entry with witnesses, the torn Evelyn page, the blue pencil found behind the drawer. The judge listened longer than he had before. That alone made Daniel hope. Price did not object immediately. He let Marin finish. Then he stood slowly, as if disappointed by the need to correct everyone. Your Honor, Miss Cole has assembled a moving story, he said. But moving is not the same as reliable. Marin's jaw tightened. Price opened the first binder. A preliminary examiner's note cannot invalidate custody protections. A missing archive scan does not prove misconduct. A broken drawer in a private home, controlled by Mr. Whitmore's staff, has no clean chain of custody despite counsel's attempt to create one retroactively. Daniel expected that. Marin had prepared for that. Then Price opened the second binder. What concerns me more, he continued, is the exploitation of a financially vulnerable minor. Daniel felt Marin shift beside him. Price placed a printed bank confirmation on the display screen. Daniel recognized the transfer before he read the amount. 2 months of rent, sent to Rosa Alvarez's landlord. His stomach dropped. Marin leaned toward him. Daniel, I did it after I saw their eviction notice, he whispered. I told your assistant. You told me you arranged legal support. I didn't think. Price turned toward the judge. Mr. Whitmore made direct financial intervention in the household of the same child he now presents as a spontaneous discoverer of evidence. I never presented Mateo as... Daniel began. Marin's hand came down on his wrist. Price continued, calm and surgical. The payment was routed through a property management company less than 24 hours after Mr. Alvarez became useful to Mr. Whitmore's litigation strategy. Useful. The word struck Mateo harder than the accusation. He sat in the back row with Rosa beside him, because Marin had insisted they attend only with counsel present. Rosa's hands were folded around the strap of her purse. Mateo stared at the screen as if the numbers were dirt smeared across his name. Daniel turned toward him. Mateo did not look back. Celeste made a small wounded sound. I had no idea. Price let that settle before speaking again. This is not about punishing poverty. It is about protecting a child from adult manipulation dressed as rescue. Marin rose. The timeline matters. Mateo identified the signature before any rent assistance. And yet Mr. Whitmore controlled the assistance after, Price replied, which creates ongoing influence. The payment went to prevent eviction. Conveniently charitable. Daniel heard the ugliness inside the phrase. He also heard the trap. If he defended the payment with emotion, he sounded reckless. If he minimized it, he made Rosa and Mateo look like tools. So he stood. Marin's eyes warned him, but this time he did not speak to Price. He spoke to the judge. I helped them because I saw an eviction notice in a shoebox where a child kept his coins, Daniel said. I did not ask permission. I did not think about how it would look. That was arrogant, but I did not buy that boy's eyes. He saw the signature before I knew his last name. Price's expression barely changed. A polished admission does not cure contamination. The judge looked at Mateo's legal aid attorney. Does the minor wish to provide any statement? Mateo's attorney bent close to him. Mateo shook his head once. Rosa whispered something. He shook his head again, harder. Then he stood anyway. I don't want his money, Mateo said. His voice cracked on money. I didn't know about it. My grandma didn't ask him. If we owe it back, we'll owe it back. But I'm not lying about the paper. Price folded his hands. No one is calling you a liar, Mateo. Mateo laughed under his breath. That's how adults call kids liars when there's a judge. A few faces in the room changed. Not enough to save him. Enough for Daniel to remember it later. The judge did not strike Mateo's observation, but he also did not rely on it. He ordered Dr. Nance's declaration held for review. He approved Marin's request to preserve original documents, but declined to delay Clara's therapeutic placement until the guardian ad litem submitted a recommendation. It was not a loss. It felt worse because it was almost a win. Then Clara was called. The therapist sat beside her. Celeste sat just behind. Price did not stand near them. He did not need to. The judge leaned forward. "Clara, do you understand we only want to know where you feel safe right now?" Clara looked at Daniel. Her face did not ask him to save her. It asked him to survive hearing the answer. "I feel safer with Aunt Celeste," she said. The words entered the room cleanly, usable, typed before they finished echoing. Daniel's hands tightened under the table. Marin whispered, "Don't react." So he did not. The judge thanked Clara gently. Celeste lowered her head as if bearing a painful victory. Price closed the second binder, but Clara was not finished. She looked down at her empty hands. "Because when people help me," she added, "they get in trouble." The therapist touched her arm. "That's enough, Clara." The judge made a note. Price's eyes flickered. Just once. Daniel saw it. Not fear, irritation. Clara had given them the sentence Celeste needed, then damaged it with the truth underneath. Outside the courtroom, Matteo pulled away from Rosa and walked straight to Daniel. "Don't come to our apartment," he said. Daniel took the blow because he had earned part of it. "I won't. Don't pay anything else." "I won't. And don't say I'm helping you." Matteo's face worked hard to stay angry. "I'm not. I can't." Rosa called his name softly. Matteo looked back, then at Daniel again. "If my grandma loses our place because of this, your daughter won't be the only kid they moved somewhere nobody can hear." He left before Daniel could answer. Marin came up beside him, holding the preservation order Price had failed to stop. "We got document freeze," she said. Daniel watched Matteo disappear through the courthouse doors and lost the boy. For now. Daniel looked down at the order. It gave them access to originals, metadata, and sealed filing logs. But across the hallway, Clara walked beside Celeste without a pencil, without a flower, without any object left to speak through. Only once, before the elevator doors closed, she glanced back at Daniel. Then she touched her thumb to her palm, a small turn, a key with no lock left in her hand. By morning, Daniel Whitmore was no longer just a grieving father in a custody dispute. He was a headline, billionaire accused of using homeless boy in Heiress custody battle. The article appeared before breakfast, then multiplied across legal blogs, gossip accounts, and business feeds that usually cared more about Daniel's stock price than his daughter. A photo from the reception showed Matteo being led through the atrium by security. Another showed Daniel standing 3 steps away, face tight, one hand half raised. The caption did the damage Price needed. "Whitmore watches as minor accomplice is removed from law firm." Marin read it on her phone without changing expression. "Do not respond." Daniel stood in his kitchen. "They called him an accomplice." "I know. He's 12. I know that too. My communications team can correct this in 10 minutes. "No," Marin said. "Your communications team can make you look powerful in 10 minutes. That is different from making Matteo safe." His phone rang again. This time it was Rosa Alvarez. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, voice small with controlled anger. "There are 2 people here asking about my grandson." Daniel closed his eyes. "Where are you?" "At home. They say Child Services received a report." Marin was already reaching for her coat. "Do not let them in without identification," Daniel said. "Marin is coming. I am coming too." "No," Rosa said sharply. Daniel stopped. "You coming here makes it worse. Cameras are outside. My neighbors are watching. Matteo thinks this is his fault. It isn't. You know that. I know that. But systems do not ask what is true first. They ask what is easy to write down." The words struck Daniel because they sounded like Clara's life in another apartment. Marin took the phone gently from his hand. "Mrs. Alvarez, this is Marin Cole. I'm sending legal aid counsel to you now. Mr. Whitmore will not come unless your attorney asks for him." Daniel stared at her. She covered the speaker. This is what doing it right feels like. It felt like abandonment. Still, he stayed. An hour later, his PR director arrived with drafted statements and a proposed counter-campaign. They had old articles about guardianship abuse, screenshots of Price with donors, and a thread connecting his firm to sealed estate cases. They could push the narrative by noon. Daniel read every page. Then he imagined Clara seeing it on a tablet in Celeste's apartment, adults arguing over her pain. Matteo's face beside words like accomplice and manipulation. Evelyn's name turned into strategy. He handed the folder back. "No." The PR director blinked. "No statement?" "One statement," Daniel said. I will cooperate with the court. I will protect the privacy of the children involved. No names, no accusations. That will look weak. Daniel thought of every time he had mistaken volume for strength. Good. By afternoon, Price made his next move. The Guardian ad litem received an updated recommendation from Clara's therapist. Immediate placement in a therapeutic residential program in Vermont, outside the media environment, outside Daniel's influence, outside the reach of spontaneous symbolic triggers. Maren read the phrase aloud. Spontaneous symbolic triggers, she said. He means flowers. Daniel's hand tightened around the back of a chair. How fast can they move her? If the judge signs emergency transport, tomorrow morning. For the first time all day, Daniel almost made the old choice. Private security, injunction by brute force, reporters at the gate, board members calling judges they knew from charity dinners. He could feel the machinery of wealth waiting for him, polished and eager. Then he saw Clara in the conference room, folding a tissue because no one had left her anything else. No shortcuts, he said. Maren looked at him for a long second. Then we need admissible pressure before the emergency hearing. They had pieces but no final chain. Dr. Nance needed metadata. The notary archive needed days. Anika would not speak with Price breathing down the clerk's office. Mateo had withdrawn. Rosa was under review. Clara was being moved. Late that evening, Daniel drove to the edge of the Alvarez neighborhood and parked 2 blocks away. He did not get out. He texted Maren first. I am outside. I will not approach. Ask their attorney if Rosa will take a call. 10 minutes passed. Then his phone rang. Rosa did not greet him. My grandson is angry at you, she said. He should be. He is angrier at himself. That is worse. Daniel rested his forehead against the steering wheel. Mrs. Alvarez, I'm sorry. Sorry does not pay back a name once people dirty it. No. But names can be cleaned if the person who dirtied them stops trying to hold the rag. Daniel understood only part of it. Rosa continued. Mateo told me about the signature, the page leaning wrong, the fancy lawyer saying distortion happens. Yes, my husband lost our apartment 20 years ago because of a signature that leaned wrong. Daniel sat up. Rosa's voice stayed steady. We rented over a bakery. Good place. Small, but ours. The owner died. His nephew brought papers saying we agreed to leave. My husband said the signature was not his. Nobody cared. The notary stamp was there. The lawyer was clean. We were not. Daniel did not interrupt. Mateo learned paper from that story before he learned it from trash bins, Rosa said. He thinks if he had been older then, he would have saved us. Children make strange debts with the past. A muffled sound came through the line. Mateo's voice, low and upset. Rosa moved the phone away, then back. He says he is not helping you. I know. He says he might help Clara. The line rustled. Mateo came on. You didn't tell the reporters my name, the boy said. No. Why? Because you asked me not to make you part of me. Mateo breathed hard through his nose. That doesn't fix it. I know. My grandma found something. Not from your case. From ours. The old eviction paper. She kept it because she keeps everything that hurts. Daniel waited. The notary stamp, Mateo said. It's the same style as the missing log page in Clara's case. Same county seal. Same weird broken star on the edge. Daniel's pulse changed. That may not mean... I know, Mateo snapped. It may not mean anything. That's what adults say before it means something. Maren, listening on speaker from her own car, cut in. Mateo, can your grandmother give that paper to her attorney? Not to Mr. Whitmore, to her attorney. Chain of custody matters. A pause. Then Mateo said, Fine. And Mateo, Daniel added, if you come back, you set the terms. I'm not coming back for you. I understand. No, you don't, Mateo said. But maybe Clara does. The call ended. By midnight, Maren had the scan from Rosa's attorney. She placed it beside the notary index, the examiner's declaration, and the photo of the missing page entry. The broken star in the county seal was real. Tiny, easy to dismiss, harder when repeated. Maren did not call it proof. Daniel had learned not to ask her to. She said, This widens the question. For once, that was enough. At 6:10 the next morning, before the emergency transport order could be signed, Daniel walked into court without a press statement, without a public accusation, and without Mateo beside him. Maren filed one new motion, pattern of notarial irregularity affecting vulnerable parties. In the hallway behind them, Mateo appeared with Rosa and legal aid counsel. He held no flowers, only an old folded eviction paper in a clear plastic sleeve. Across the corridor, Price saw it. His face remained calm, but for the first time, he stopped walking. The emergency hearing began before the courthouse coffee stand had opened. That was how Daniel knew Price was worried. Power liked comfortable hours. It liked polished rooms, prepared statements, and time to arrange people into places where they looked most useful. This hearing had none of that. The judge wore no robe yet, only a dark jacket over his shirt. Clara arrived with Celeste and the therapist, pale and quiet, her hair pinned with the same painful neatness Daniel had begun to recognize as someone else's idea of calm. Mateo sat 3 rows behind Daniel with Rosa on one side and his legal aid attorney on the other. He kept both hands on the clear sleeve containing the old eviction paper, as if the plastic alone could keep the past from being taken away again. Price placed 3 binders on the table. Marin placed 1 thin folder. The difference looked almost embarrassing until Daniel remembered that Price used paper as a wall. Marin used it as a path. The judge began with the transfer request. "Mr. Price, I understand the proposed relocation is scheduled for this morning." "For stabilization, Your Honor," Price said. "The child has been subjected to repeated symbolic agitation, media exposure, and inappropriate adult conflict. Vermont offers distance." Marin stood. "Distance from whom? From disruption? Or from review?" Price smiled faintly. "Counsel is dramatizing a clinical recommendation." "No," Marin said. "I'm asking why the transfer was accelerated after the court ordered preservation of original documents." The judge looked at her. "Proceed carefully, Miss Cole." "I intend to." She called Dr. Nance first. The document examiner did not overstate. She said the custody signature showed signs consistent with reproduction from an image source. The strokes lacked pressure variation. Portions of the curve appeared inverted relative to the rest of the text. A color copy could preserve faint marks that a lower quality scan might hide. Price rose at once. "Consistent with is not proof." "Correct," Dr. Nance said. "It is, however, a professional reason to examine the source file, metadata, and original notary record before a child is moved out of state under that document's authority." Marin called Anika next. Price objected before the clerk reached the chair. "Confidentiality, scope, improper pressure on court staff." The judge allowed limited questioning. Anika's voice shook at first, then steadied around facts. There was an index entry for a Whitmore estate authorization notarized 1 day after Evelyn Whitmore's death. The scanned log skipped the relevant page. A sealed envelope marked Bluebird had been logged for minor child review, then reassigned before it reached the family court file. "Reassigned to whom?" Marin asked. Price stood. "Objection. Sustained for now," the judge said. "For now." Daniel held on to those 2 words. Marin did not push. She moved to the workroom. Photos appeared on the screen. The blue cabinet, the scratched lock, the torn illustrated page, the broken blue pencil, the indentations on the back. 4 petals pressed through from a sheet no one had found. One turned wrong. Price leaned back. A private room in Mr. Whitmore's home, controlled by his staff, discovered after he had motive to manufacture concern. Marin called Mrs. Harlow. The house manager described Celeste closing the workroom after the funeral, Price's assistant visiting twice for estate documents, and the blue drawer being inaccessible before Daniel ordered it secured. Then Marin turned toward Mateo. His attorney stood. "My client will not testify regarding the law firm corridor incident today. He will identify only the document in his possession." The judge nodded. Mateo walked forward with the clear sleeve. His shoulders were stiff, but his hands were steady. Marin received the paper from his attorney, not from Mateo directly. Chain of custody, respect. The small difference mattered. "This is an eviction agreement from the Alvarez family matter 20 years ago," Marin said. "We are not asking the court to decide that case. We are showing a repeated notarial irregularity." Price laughed softly. "A decades-old landlord dispute is irrelevant." Marin pointed to the scanned seal. Same county notary system, same broken star in the seal edge, same notary whose log page is missing in the Whitmore entry. The judge leaned forward. Price's smile thinned. "Coincidence does not become conspiracy because counsel arranges it in a row." "No," Marin said. "But a row tells the court where to look." Then Clara spoke. No one had asked her anything. Mom said Rose matter. The therapist reached for her notebook. Celeste touched Clara's shoulder. Clara pulled away. It was small enough that half the room might have missed it, but Daniel saw Celeste's hand remain in the air with no child beneath it. The judge softened his voice. "Clara, do you want to say something?" Price stood. "Your Honor, I object to questioning the minor without preparation." "I didn't ask her a question," the judge said. Clara looked at the screen where the pressed petals showed faintly on the torn page. "My mom made flower cards," she said. "When something was wrong, she turned one petal the other way. She said people who love you would look twice." Celeste's face tightened. "Clara, sweetheart, memories after trauma can mix together." Clara did not look at her. "She put the blue pencil in the drawer," Clara said. "I did the petals on top because she told me to practice." Aunt Celeste came in, and Mom shut the drawer fast. "After Mom died, Aunt Celeste said the room made me sick." Price's voice cooled. "This is exactly why clinical distance is necessary." Daniel stood before he knew he would. Marin glanced at him but did not stop him. "No," he said. "Clinical distance is what let everyone call my daughter's language a symptom." The judge looked at him sharply. Daniel lowered his voice. "I am not asking you to believe grief. I'm asking you to stop a transfer until the original files, metadata, notary archive, and Bluebird envelope are reviewed outside Mr. Price's control." I missed what Clara was saying. "I won't ask this court to repeat that mistake for me." Celeste finally stood. "Daniel has always needed someone to blame," she said. "First the doctors after Evelyn, then me, now a lawyer, a clerk, a child who sells paper outside the courthouse. Clara needs peace." Her voice softened, but not enough to hide the steel underneath. "Evelyn believed love was enough. I believe stability was kinder." Clara answered before Daniel could. "Peace isn't when everyone tells me what I meant." The sentence landed cleanly enough that even Price had to look at her. The judge removed the transfer order from the top of his file. "I am staying relocation pending expedited review," he said. "All original documents, metadata, notary materials, sealed envelope logs, and therapeutic submissions are to be preserved and produced to an independent special master. Miss Whitmore's temporary authority remains under review. Mr. Price, you will provide the chain of custody for the Whitmore estate authorization by 5 p.m. Price nodded once. "Of course, Your Honor," but his hand closed over the edge of his binder, hard enough to bend the cover. Clara looked at Daniel. This time, she did not whisper. "I looked twice," she said. Daniel nodded, because his voice would not carry the weight properly. Mateo looked down at his grandfather's old eviction paper. For the first time since the headline, he did not hide it against his chest. He held it where the court could see. 2 days later, the same courtroom felt smaller, not kinder, only less certain of itself. The independent special master had finished the first review faster than anyone expected, because the metadata was not subtle once someone outside Price's office opened it. It was only an emergency metadata review, not a final ruling, but it was enough to show where the paper trail had been bent. The Whitmore estate authorization had been created 12 hours after Evelyn's death. The signature layer came from an older scanned practice card stored in a family archive folder. The notary seal matched a batch used in multiple disputed filings, including the Alvarez eviction paper, and the Bluebird envelope had been rerouted through Price's firm before it ever reached the minor child file. Price did not argue loudly. Professionals like him rarely did when the wall began to crack. He adjusted his glasses, objected to scope, questioned admissibility, and used the phrase preliminary irregularities 3 times. The judge let him finish. Then he said, "Mr. Price, the court is referring this matter to the State Bar and the District Attorney's Office." Celeste's hand moved toward Clara's shoulder out of habit. The court officer stepped between them. "Miss Whitmore," the judge continued, "your temporary guardianship authority is suspended pending investigation. Contact with the minor will be supervised by the court only." Celeste looked at Clara then, finally without an audience to perform for. Clara did not look away. Mateo sat beside Rosa in the second row. His old eviction paper lay in an evidence sleeve on the clerk's desk. For once, no one called it street trash, irrelevant, or unfortunate history. It had a label, a number, a place in the record. The judge turned toward him. "Mateo Alvarez, this court recognizes that your observation initiated a necessary review. You were not a trespasser in the truth." Mateo looked down fast, but Rosa put one hand over his. Daniel stood last. "I blame systems when they failed my daughter," he said, "but I also hid inside them when listening to her was harder. Clara should not have needed a stranger to notice what her father missed." He turned toward Clara. "I'm sorry." Clara held the edge of the table with both hands. She did not forgive him in a sentence. She only nodded once. And for that day, that was enough. Clara came home on a Thursday with a court-appointed advocate, a new therapist, and no celebration waiting in the driveway. Daniel had wanted balloons, fresh flowers, Clara's favorite pancakes, maybe the old yellow blanket from the movie room folded at the foot of her bed. He wanted the house to look like an apology big enough for a child to believe. Marin told him not to. "Make it quiet," she said. "Let her enter without performing gratitude." So Daniel opened the front door himself and stepped back. Clara stood on the threshold for a long moment. Her suitcase was small. Celeste had packed it badly. All stiff dresses and court shoes, nothing soft except one sweater with a loose button. Mrs. Harlow waited in the hall, hands clasped. "Welcome home, Miss Clara," she said. Clara looked at Daniel before answering, as if checking whether she was allowed to choose her own words. Daniel kept his hands at his sides. "You can say it however you want." Clara swallowed. "Hi, Mrs. Harlow." It was not much. It was everything. That first week, Clara did not sleep in her old bedroom. She slept on a mattress in Evelyn's workroom, beside the blue cabinet, with the door open and a night light shaped like a moon. Daniel slept in the hallway the first 2 nights because she asked him to, then stopped on the third because she asked him not to make the hallway sad. He learned the difference. Listening was not waiting for a child to say the thing he hoped to hear. It was letting her change the answer. The investigation continued without becoming dinner conversation. Price resigned from his firm before the State Bar hearing, which did not make him innocent. Celeste's attorneys called the allegations tragic misunderstandings, which did not return the months Clara had lost. More families came forward after the notary irregularities became public. Rosa gave one statement through legal aid and refused every interview request afterward. "Pain is not a job," she told Daniel when he offered media protection. So he arranged what she asked for instead: a housing attorney, privacy screens for the apartment windows, and a vendor permit that let Mateo sell paper flowers legally outside the courthouse without being chased from the steps. Mateo accepted the permit because it had his name on it, not Daniel's. He accepted the folding table because Rosa said dignity did not require standing in the rain. He did not accept the new backpack. "I have one," he said. "It has a broken zipper," Daniel replied. Mateo stared at him. Daniel caught himself and tried again. "Would you like this one, or should I return it?" Mateo considered the question as if it were more important than the backpack. "Leave it," he said. "I'll think about it." That became the shape of their friendship. Offered, refused, reconsidered. No speeches, no rescue. 1 month after the hearing, Clara asked to visit Mateo's table. The courthouse steps looked different without reporters. People still hurried past with folders pressed to their chests, carrying grief in legal envelopes, but some stopped now. A clerk bought a purple flower. A young mother bought 2. An old man asked Mateo if the blue ones were lucky. Mateo shrugged. "Depends what you do after you notice them." Clara stood beside Daniel, holding a folded card from Evelyn's workroom. The missing half of the page had not been found. Maybe it would turn up in evidence storage. Maybe it had been destroyed. Clara had stopped asking every day. Healing, Daniel was learning, did not mean all the pages came back. It meant someone stayed while you read the torn ones. Mateo slid a small paper flower across the table. 4 white petals, 1 blue petal turned backward. "For you," he said. Clara touched it carefully. "How much?" Mateo glanced at Daniel, then at Rosa, who raised one eyebrow. "For you?" Mateo said. "One answer." Clara tilted her head. "What was the rest of the sentence?" he asked. "The one your mom wrote." Clara looked down at the card in her hand. The surviving words were still there. "When the truth is turned." She took the blue pencil Daniel had begun carrying because she might ask for it someday. Under her mother's unfinished line, Clara wrote slowly, looked twice, then she stopped, thought for a moment, and added another word. "Together." Daniel read it and felt the ache of it. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Something steadier and harder to lose. Clara handed the card to him. "Can we put it back in the drawer?" she asked. Daniel looked at the blue cabinet, then back at his daughter. "Do you want it locked?" Clara shook her head. "No," she said. "Just closed." So that evening, they placed the card in the blue drawer without turning a key. Daniel did not call it an ending. Clara did not call it home yet, but when she walked upstairs, she left her bedroom door open, and this time, no one wrote down what that meant before asking her.